Hi, and welcome to this episode of Our Guest Is, presented by My East Coast Experience Media in partnership with RBC. Our Guest Is introduces us to a resilient group of people commonly known or referred to as immigrants, but probably better described as entrepreneurs, community builders, and survivors. And in each episode, we're going to hear about their journey and how they came to Atlantic Canada in their own words. And today, our guest is Dr. Paul Banahene Adjei from Newfoundland. You're in Newfoundland today. So thank you so much for joining us. And Dr. Paul, you were an honoree of the Most Inspiring Immigrants in Atlantic Canada 2022. So congratulations. And that's a My East Coast Experience Media initiative presented by RBC. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
So a little bit of background on you, Dr. Paul. So you're originally from Ghana. And you're currently the dean and associate dean and professor and associate professor at Memorial University in Newfoundland. You know, you've taught at universities and colleges from this coast to Toronto, and you're a public speaker and a mentor. I mean, when I read your bio, I kind of got intimidated. So, are you? Is that something that commonly happens for you?
Uh, I don't know about that. I mean, for me, it also, is about the humility, in recognizing that my story wouldn't have been possible without the journey and the struggle that our forebears made for us in this place. I mean, technically, we were not meant to be here. And so our stories today, talks about the surviving spirit, of our people. But I think that in terms of what we've been able to do, it has to do with, the fact that we stand on the shoulders of those who have been here before us. They prepared the way and therefore make the transition very easier for us. I don't know about people feeling intimidated about that. I feel like they are just positions. That among the accounts of Ghana, we have a saying that it is not so much about what you are called, it's what you answer to that is really important. So you can be called with all these titles and all these things that you've been able to accomplish, but its impact on humanity is the most important thing.
Mhm. One of the most interesting things about you, Paul, is your journey from Ghana now to doing social work and specializing in Indigenous matters. And can you tell us a little bit about that?
No, thank you very much. I think that for me, the notion of my identity as an indigenous person who draw his indigeneity from Africa has always been who I am. It's not something that I learned to acquire. It's like my race, it's like my gender, it's like my sexuality, it's who I am. But I think that for me, why this is very important in the work that we do is that, and here I take inspiration from the wise words of my one of my mentor, Professor George Day from University of Toronto, who mentioned some years ago that there is nothing like undercover scholar for a black person. And so what it means that my scholarship, my activism must speak to my indebtedness to my community. And in this particular context, my identity as a black person and my identity as somebody who draw his indigeneity from Africa. But it is also speak broadly in terms of the collective responsibilities that I have in terms of building strong allies with indigenous communities in Canada, making sure that we work together to make this land better than it's found. And by way of addition, I was just recently appointed as the interim associate vice president for indigenous research. So that is another position that I am carrying alongside my deanship. But for me, it is what we do as an individual, what we stand for, and what we represent. It's not a job. It's not a profession. For me, it is a service, and that is what really matters to me because my work must speak to when you enter into a territory or a space. Just as the land has been generous and good in giving you the best of what it could offer, it is also part of our responsibility in making sure that we work together to make the place better than we find it. So investing in indigenization is, for me, is a matter of principle, but it's also, in a broadly speaking, it is what my identity represents every day.
Yeah, and I love that connection between, Indigenous from Ghana and Indigenous from Canada, and that connection that you're making is very significant. And I think that is what's so surprising about your background and your experience and what you're doing now is that it is kind of an unlikely pairing, but there is
Mhm.
that similarity as you touched on. So, is there something that you've learned and take with you that you've learned from elders in Newfoundland?
Yes, I mean, there is a lot that I have learned from the elders in Newfoundland. Recently in our school, we engaged in visiting elders pilot project where we brought indigenous elders from various communities to come to School of Social Work and Memorial School in general to speak to us about issues around colonization, decolonization, and indigenization. But in many cases, anytime I have an opportunity of interacting with elders and knowledge keepers, it continued to remind me home in terms of my own interaction with my elders and the taking for granted knowledge and wisdom that we receive from elders. There is a saying that, you never know what you have until you start, feeling a sense of, nostalgia about it. So, in terms of, interaction with elders here, in many ways, it reminds me, the things that I take for granted when I am home in Ghana and I am with my elders, the wisdom and the knowledge they gave me. But it also sort of remind me of what I'm also missing in terms of thinking broadly. What does it mean to be successful for me as a black person who also drawn my African indigenization? Oftentimes the conversation about our success stories has always been what we have been able to accomplish as individual or even as a collective. But what it doesn't come with the conversation is what we have to give up in order to be successful. And the part that reminds me of what I'm losing in many ways is that constant touch with my elders back home. And that is why I'm extremely grateful and very gracious when elders, of Newfoundland help to fill the void because they continue to carry the wisdom. We have a saying, in my community in Ghana that when you don't have an elder to advise you and you are walking by somebody's, house and you hear an elder advising the young ones, you listen, you have an eardrop and you take it. And so for me, having an opportunity of interacting with others here, I feel like they are filling the void, something that I am missing with my elders home.
Yeah. So, we were just talking about your community in Ghana. I mean, can you take us back to young Dr. Paul? What was it like growing up for you?
Thank you. I mean, I am an Ashanti. An Ashanti is one of the major tribal groups in Ghana, but it belongs to an ethnic group called the Akans. But when we are talking about our indigenous identity as an Ashanti, it's not so much about the tribe or even the ethnic. We move on to the next stage where we talk about our clan. So I belong to the Bretu clan. Bretu clan is one of the 9 clans, among the Ashantis, and we have the tiger as our totem. Now, growing up in Ghana, there were several opportunities of listening to my elders because elders have a very interesting way of communicating to us through proverbs, using storytelling and riddles to guide us in terms of what we do. But the irony of it is that despite all the knowledge that I gained, sitting with my elders, when I started the education system in Ghana, I wasn't encouraged to continue to be interested and invest much time in the knowledge that I'm receiving from elders. As a matter of fact, the school system did everything possible to discourage me from those knowledge. And I've in my own work I've talked extensively about you know learning about Niagara Falls. Meanwhile, the Boti Falls, which is closer to my community where, we were doing fishing and swimming, those were left out in the conversation. And long before, the West started talking about the idea about environmental protection, I was, raised by our elders who taught me not to go to forests. There are certain river banks that I am not supposed to play around because it's the sacred place of the gods. And also there are certain trees that in my communities you were not even allowed to remove the bark from that tree for medicinal purpose unless you perform certain ritual. So we were made to understand that ontologically speaking, we are connected to a cosmos world, something that is bigger than ourselves, and that we are liable with to the gods and their ancestors. Yet the school system did everything possible to discourage us from continue working with that knowledge. And so in many ways, the more successful I became in the school system in Ghana, the more I realized that I was losing everything in terms of what makes me an indigenous person to my community. I've shared my experience even having come to Canada and going back to have a conversation with my elders. And yes, my mom know who is talking because the voice and the body sounds like her son that left the shores of Ghana several years ago. Yet when she observed my manners, it felt like I am an imposter. Somebody, maybe an alien, kidnap, her son and replace it with another body. Because every aspect of my cultural upbringing, I realized that I was losing it. I remember in one of the visits, I was at the chief palace talking to elders. And in my culture, it is extremely offensive to address elders using the left hand as a gesture. In fact, you can't use the left hand basically in addressing elders. Well, while I was talking to the elders, I noticed that one of my uncles were signaling me to put my hands down, and I was not aware of what is he trying to do. And then it occurred to me that apparently I was addressing the elders using the left hand as a gesture, something that is just unacceptable. Well, I became aware for a split of a second, recheck myself. But I think that somehow, somewhere in the conversation, I went back to the left hand. And I said to myself, this is what pizza has done to me. Living in Canada and eating too much pizza, I'm losing what it makes me a whole. No, but the truth is that that is the stories that we carry as immigrants living in this society. There are a lot of things that we are benefiting from this society. There are a lot of things that we are learning, but there's also a lot of things that we are missing. And so sometimes it becomes really difficult to even define who we are. And that is the question that I raise in terms of what does it mean to be successful? You know, maybe in terms of education, and what Western definition of success. I could be whatever anybody can be. I mean, somebody who grew up in a small community in Ghana and today is an associate vice president and a dean of a university. I mean, this story is something that is not often time. It's more possible in movies than in reality. So in every definition of success, yes, I have been. But the question is to my mom in the community, how successful I am when I cannot simply interact with my elders, when I cannot simply draw on my cultural knowledge, my traditional knowledge. It felt like there is a part of me that I am losing every day. And it is a central question that every immigrant have to grapple with in terms of what success really means in this society.
So, what kind of going back to growing up in Ghana? I mean, what brought you to Canada? Why Newfoundland?
Okay, so let me start with my story. When I finished the University of Ghana, I, I work, for some time, and then I felt the need to, continue my education. and I got admission to University of Toronto. Now the question is why Toronto? Because one of my chief, in the person of Professor Day. I know Professor Day is, one of the, so it's not just an elder, but a chief in my community in Ghana. And so it was easier for me to decide to come to Canada through his support. So I gained admission to U of T, did both my master's and PhD there. And so when I was finishing my PhD, I was looking for a place, you know, to work, for tenure track position. And the first job that I got a sense that it was available was Memorial University, where there was tenure track position. And that is the interesting thing about my story. It was the first job I applied when I finished U of T. It's the first job I got interview, and it is the first job I got hired. So, my story, unlike maybe others who have to try several jobs before or apply several jobs, it didn't apply to me. Well, when I came here, the first time I came, I just fall in love with the province. And for several reasons, part of it is I saw a huge opportunity emerging, in particular for my area of scholarship and activism. As I've always mentioned, my focus has always been on anti-black racism, social justice, and indigenization. And so here is a province that, because of the offshore oil drilling, there was an emerging immigrants population, and not just the immigrants. There were a lot of immigrants coming from Nigeria, and there are also international students coming from Ghana and other, in the Caribbean. And also because of the nursing program, there were nurses that were coming. But then when I look at in terms of the general scholarship at Memorial University, I felt there was a missing gap, gaps that focus on dealing with these immigrants. Because as I keep saying, when immigrants come, it's not just the bodies that are coming, they are carrying with them their culture, their value system, their tradition, which impart the kind of questions, the new questions and the new needs that they are bringing. And so, how we prepare social work students to be able to understand the unique cultural context these immigrants bring with them, and the kind of emerging questions that require an answer is very important. In fact, that is the difference between Newfoundland and many big cities, in the sense that we have an opportunity as a province to learn from where other big cities like Toronto, Vancouver, and even to some extent, Halifax, because this is a place where an immigrants of color, the population is just emerging. So we need to know how institutions and structures have to function, come up with a workable solution, so that we do not wait till it become a problem before we start looking for answers. So I felt like, okay, this is a new grounds and this is a new territory to launch my scholarship in a way that will have a very meaningful impact. Being the only university in the province also make it easier. I have constant interaction with ministers, with policymakers. Some of them happen to be a student that you are, dealing with. So you know that whatever you are teaching, whatever you are doing is having direct impact. And in many ways, you find yourself as you are not just a small fish in a big pond, but you are a fish that feel like you are contributing to what is happening within the pond. And so, it's a decision that I have never regretted. That I remember some years ago there was opportunity for me to take a look at some jobs in Toronto, and nothing inspired me to that. Why would I do that when I know that my work is making a direct impact? So yes, uh, believe it or not, Newfoundlands have a very tempting ways of seducing the individual to be part of this community. That once you come to love it, it's difficult to leave. And maybe there's a reason why we are an island. Even if you want to leave, we won't just let you leave easily.
Yeah. Well, we love that you're here in Atlantic Canada, Paul, and that you didn't
Yeah,
choose,
yeah.
the big flashy cities, and that you chose to be here. And we thank you so much for spending time with us, with our podcast, and just appreciate this so much. I could talk to you all day. You are very wise and have much great wisdom and experience. So I really appreciate you giving us the time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Paul, and thank you for watching. Our guest is presented by My East Coast Experience Media and RBC. We will be back in just 2 weeks, joined by another very special guest. If you don't want to miss any episodes, you can subscribe to the podcast. You can find us on myeastcoastexperience.com, Spotify, Google Podcast, Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and YouTube. And of course, you can follow My East Coast Experience online on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thank you again for joining us. Thanks again, Paul. And we hope to see you for our next episode of Our Guest Is.
Thank you very much for having me. Bye.